What can you expect from Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy as rookie first-round fantasy football quarterbacks in 2024? We break down those two players as we close another week of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day as well. I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, for today's show. I'm filling in here for Michelle Madzuk, so I'm flying solo here on a Friday. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, on today's show, as we said at the top, we're going to look at Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy, these quarterbacks from USC and Michigan, respectively. A lot of buzz around them because they're having their pro days this week. We already had Caleb work out for mainly the Bears, knowing he'll be the first overall pick with Justin Fields traded. But J.J. McCarthy's outcomes have a wider range here, so we'll break those down for you on today's show. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy betting and free agency, draft, even March Madness for sportingnews.com. So check me out there. Michelle is on vacation here. She writes for NFL.com and researches for them as well. So we're holding court here without her on this Friday, and we will get into our draft talk on today's show. Before we get into the potential of Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy as fantasy producers here in 2024, let's look at the recent history. We'll go back to actually the Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston draft of 2015. Now, it used to be that you wanted to stay away as far as possible from rookie quarterbacks, but I think Cam Newton changed that quite a bit in 2011 when he was a top producer for the Panthers as the number one overall pick. Now, last year's number one overall pick, going full circle, Bryce Young was not good in fantasy, but we did have some really strong fantasy football assets emerge as rookies, one for the longer term, one for a short period of time that teased with his upside. Now, with Mariota and Winston, we didn't get that much back in 2015. Mariota was the number 2 overall pick. He actually ended up as QB18 in average scoring. Jameis Winston right behind him as the number 1 overall pick. This is for the Titans and the Bucks. Winston was at QB19, so nothing to see there. It got pretty bad there with Carson Wentz and Jared Goff there. And remember Paxton Lynch? He was there in 2016 as a first-round pick. Wentz was the highest there, 28. Lynch at 36, actually. And Goff, we know he had a disastrous year there with Jeff Fisher. He was at 43. So it wasn't that good for those two classes. It got a lot better in 2017. Of course, Patrick Mahomes was redshirted, so to speak, behind Alex Smith, but he did play one game late and showed his potential there starting in Denver. And he finishes QB 39, Mitchell Trubisky QB 37. So those guys didn't start right away, but Deshaun Watson was outstanding before he went down with a knee injury in his rookie year that really cut it short. He was at QB1 on the board. So Deshaun Watson with that running ability and being able to throw downfield in a good Texans offense gave you really the ultimate that you could expect from a rookie first-round quarterback. Now, let's go back to the Lamar Jackson draft. He actually did not start. We know they made a transition from Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson that year, but he did end up as their starting quarterback late in the season. He had some massive games that put him at QB 13 if you just look at where he would be starting in terms of his average scoring. So again, the running quarterback, the mobility really paid off there for Lamar Jackson. Not so much for Josh Allen, but there was a transition there as well. He ended up as QB 19. Baker Mayfield, the first overall pick in that class, was QB 20, and then Sam Darnold 34, and then Josh Rosen way off the board here in his one season with the Cardinals there in 2018. Now, we go to 2019, and the Cardinals rebooted with Kyler Murray, again, a running quarterback, ended up being a QB1 in terms of top 12 scoring. He was at number 11. So getting better, and that trend continues there. So Watson, Jackson, Murray were all pretty viable when they were starting in those years as rookies. And actually, Daniel Jones, there was a three-way tie for 11th with Kyler Murray, and Daniel Jones not too far behind him at QB15. So very interesting there that we've had the running mobile quarterbacks. They've been great and pretty good for fantasy, but everyone else, especially if they're not seeing the field, if they're pocket passers, they're not going to necessarily be what we want in fantasy. But it did change a little bit last year, and it did change in this draft in 2020. Justin Herbert had an unprecedented rookie year in terms of just taking over in the first game when Tyrod Taylor couldn't go. He ended up as a QB9. Joe Burrow, before he had his devastating injury there as a rookie, tore his ACL against the Commanders, he was at QB19. Jalen Hurts was behind Carson Wentz for much of the season, but he started down the stretch, had one 35-plus point fantasy game. He was at QB7, so very good class that has continued here. It's gotten better. Tua Tagovailoa, they made the transition there in Miami from Ryan Fitzpatrick. He was at QB22. So again, you're having a little bit of a pivot there. Once we got past the Winston, Mariota, Wentz, Goff drafts, we really started seeing fantasy football rookie quarterbacks having some viability right away. And again, we had an off year the last 2 years, so kind of go cyclical here, but Mac Jones is the leading quarterback, believe it or not, from that class that followed in 2021. Yeah, he was the best rookie on the board at QB 29. You had Trevor Lawrence at QB 36, Zach Wilson 37, Justin Fields 45. So we really didn't see those guys take the field. And of course, Trey Lance was on the bench for the 49ers. Believe it or not, Davis Mills was pretty strong in that mix. They're starting for the Texans as a second-round pick as QB 35. So we want to forget that. And, of course, we're going to forget the Kenny Pickett year. He was the best on the board there at QB 28. And we know all those quarterbacks have pretty much gone except for Malik Willis from that class on different teams traded this offseason. Pickett, Desmond Ridder, and Sam Howell. So, look, there's been a mixed bag of these rookies producing here. And going back, yeah, you want the running quarterback, and that bodes well for Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy. They're two athletic guys. The system is very important, and the inherited weapons. Deshaun Watson came in, and he had DeAndre Hopkins, Lamar Jackson, a good established Ravens team, but they tailored their system with Greg Roman to Lamar Jackson's strengths. Definitely they did that in Arizona with Kyler Murray as they hired Cliff Kingsbury in accordance with drafting Murray. So all that was into play. And then Justin Herbert was just good naturally. Burrow showed his upside right away. Jalen Hurts, they really said, okay, you can run, and we're going to play to that in Philadelphia as he replaced Wentz. So we've seen that develop. And then if they didn't produce in the rookie year, one part of it is, okay, they just weren't good enough when we didn't see it, and that was it. But we saw Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence get some help here in their next years and got better as fantasy football asset. Definitely happened with Justin Fields as well. So once the competent coaching came for some of these guys, they produced. But producing right away, it's hard for rookies, but we have to keep attention of all these guys because they all could have some viability. We've seen that where that can happen, but Caleb Williams certainly will. And we'll break down where Caleb Williams stands in relation here to last year's top rookie quarterbacks and where his ranking is right now in keeper and dynasty. And then we'll look at J.J. McCarthy as he works out to what teams he could land on, what's the best landing spot for him on the rest of today's show. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp, and it can be a challenging time of year. We are trying to get to the home stretch. If you've got kids, you're looking for the end of the school year. Maybe it's been stressful with job and running around. And for some of us, we get some spring break time coming up, so that'll be good to give us a reprieve. But what would you do if you just had an extra hour in your day to do whatever you would like? What would that time be for? What would you do it there with it, I mean, would you take a walk, read a book, just take a nap? Well, you need to figure out what is a priority in your life. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you do that, find what matters to you so you can do more of it. I really leaned on therapy quite a bit here to help me through life, and it's there for me when I lose my way a little bit and need a little bit better direction. Therapy is there for me. And really, I can't recommend going to a therapist regularly. And online therapy makes it a little bit easy there for you because you can stay and do it from your home and really connect with the right therapist for you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn to get started with your therapy today. All right, this is a big time of year across the board in sports, and there's no different feeling here on the Locked On Network because you got to be checking out Locked On Sports today. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? A free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day. That's Locked On Sports Today to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let us take a deep dive into Caleb Williams here and look what his fantasy potential is. Now, very interesting. In keeper dynasty rankings, according to Fantasy Pros, the consensus in the industry, he's at QB10. That's pretty aggressive because he's in the top 12, and as a QB1, there's reasons for this. I mean, clearly, right? I mean, let's start looking at last year's quarterbacks that produced. CJ Stroud was QB10 on the board. So he finished in the top 12, the right where Williams is ranked right now. And he was great for the Texans. He was more of a pocket passer, didn't rely a lot on his running. So what he did was take advantage of the system. We said system, supporting cast. That was definitely there with Bobby Slowick. We had two great receivers for him for much of the season in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. He had the quarterback there, or the tight end there for the quarterback in Dalton Schultz. There are all kinds of weapons that kept producing for him, including Noah Brown there as the third wide receiver. So good situation, good system, and the quarterback executing in that system. That's what you got from CJ Stroud. That's why he was number 10. The next rookie was actually not too far behind. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see a lot of Anthony Richardson. The shoulder injury curbed what could have been there. Gardner Minshew was an okay fill-in, but we know Anthony Richardson also had QB1 top 12 potential because he finished at 12. Guess who he was tied with his production? Someone he was compared to based on his running ability. It was Justin Fields. So both these guys, in terms of average scoring, finished as the last QB on the board that would qualify as a QB1. So what do they have in common? Obviously, very dynamic runners with big arms. They had the weapons. And we saw that all season long with Justin Fields throwing to DJ Moore. He was a little bit up and down, but when they unleashed him as a runner and they didn't curb him back there, that's when he really produced. He really had some nice big games with DJ Moore, really as his only reliable receiver. Darnell Mooney was hurt for much of the season, so that was the top wideout. And we had, of course, Cole Kmet having to be second on the team here. And the Fields running really a big part of what he did last season. How did he get there as a top 12? Well, he didn't do a lot when you look at it. 657 yards rushing and 4 TDs on the ground. Keep in mind, he did miss some time, and Tyson Bagent had to play, but only 16-9 in terms of TD passes there for him, and to interceptions, 2,562 yards. So very modest passing total. Stroud did it more again with the passing. Richardson was headed to a nice spot here to be a well-rounded fantasy producer with his arm and legs. So again, there's that potential with Caleb Williams. You would say of these two quarterbacks, he's probably a little bit more like Anthony Richardson because he's got the big arm and the mobility. And we know he can be a very dynamic runner and score quite a bit. So this QB10 ranking might seem aggressive, but we've talked about it. The Bears offense is very much improved. They could target offensive line help or even more wide receiver help in the draft. Now they have Keenan Allen in that trade, so he has reliable possession, older guy. If he can stay healthy, Allen can deliver there. They also added Gerald Everett at tight end. You're going to see more 12 personnel looks from the new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. We've talked about that, so you could see situations where Kmet and Everett, Allen, and Moore are the guys on the field there. That's a pretty good array of weapons. Everett is a very decent athlete, especially playing off Kmet. So you get those two guys into the mix, and then you work in DeAndre Swift, who is a plus receiver. We've talked about that. And Caleb Williams is just a very good instinctive playmaker and distributor, and he's going to do the right things here to move the ball. So he's going to be dynamic with his big arm, move out, but he's also going to take the checkdowns that are available to help him produce that way with yardage. He's also going to push the ball downfield when he gets a chance. And DJ Moore and Williams, will watch that kind of chemistry develop. There clearly is some connection already between Keenan Allen and Caleb Williams. They both were in Los Angeles last year, getting paid when you look at NIL for Caleb Williams. So Allen Williams, they connected again at the pro day, hanging out. So that's a good sign, right? That he's already latching on to a receiver. And maybe the Bears were aware of this, that Keenan Allen was a good target for them, especially in exchange for only a 4th-round pick, to say, look, there's some connection there that they've already built from the Los Angeles part of things. Now they can work on the field. DJ Moore is probably the most bummed about this because he was really feeling it with Justin Fields. But DJ Moore has produced with a bunch of quarterbacks going back to the Panthers. So, yeah, the weapons are pretty good. You've got the running ability. You've got the checkdown potential. You got the touchdown potential. So all the things really line up for Caleb Williams. Now, what do I think about that 10 ranking? It might be a little bit low. That's all I'm going to say because, again, everything points there, right? With what Justin Fields did, Williams is higher upside as a passer. He's still established mobility here, so he can peel into what Richardson did. He can also tap into what Stroud did. So if that would add up here, QB10 seems like a conservative estimate. That seems like his floor, right? With what the production says about these teams. Now, again, it's a different offense, but again, that's going to take advantage of Williams throwing the ball with Waldron. They also had Russell Wilson with Waldron for a year or two in Seattle. So that also showed that he can adjust to the mobile quarterback and get him what he needs to be successful. So all these things line up real well. Again, QB10, I think it's aggressive. I think it's a bit modest here. I think he has a real good shot to finish high. And again, I don't think we're going to see the numbers of Deshaun Watson that special year. But if you're looking at a top 8 quarterback, top 9, somewhere between Justin Herbert and what we saw with Kyler Murray, I think you're looking at that wheelhouse for sure in the rookie season for Caleb Williams. Now, it'll be interesting what we think about with J.J. McCarthy because he has a more different, a wider range of options there because, again, we know Caleb Williams is locked into the Bears, which helps us already assess his fantasy value. But J.J. McCarthy, we're going to explore all the teams he can land with there, and it really is any team picking after the Bears. We'll do that in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football to close the week. All right, I'm excited. It's March Madness. My team is in it again. If you didn't know my team, it says it right across my chest. If you're watching, if you're listening, it's Northwestern. So, yeah, I wanted to get in on the action here for FanDuel. They're going to play UConn potentially in the second round if they can get past another Final Four team, Florida Atlantic, in the first round. But again, whoever you're counting on, whether it's your favorite team or a team that you like as a sleeper or a favorite you expect to dominate in the first or second round, you don't need to worry if you're off on that pick because your bracket can never be busted when you can just pick the next game of the tournament. That's what FanDuel allows you to do. Say goodbye to those busted brackets. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sports book. Yes, get in on the madness now. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. A lot of good sleepers. Just don't pick Kentucky because they were eliminated on the first day of the tournament by the upset-minded Golden Grizzlies of Oakland. So there's a lot of madness to come there. There's going to be more upsets, more fun to have there. and a lot of things to look at with the point spreads, and the future is there. So check it all out at FanDuel Sportsbook. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets there in Phoenix. All right, it is time to close the show. JJ McCarthy is having his pro day here on Friday, so it's a good time to talk about him again. And I'm really high on JJ McCarthy. I think what's been difficult for a lot of analysts and evaluators and draft scouts is just knowing that maybe he had untapped potential. Michigan was a heavy running team. They were a great defensive team as they developed into a national champion under Jim Harbaugh. So JJ McCarthy, I don't want to use that dreaded term, game manager. In fact, I cringe when people say he's like Alex Smith in his skill set. Yeah, he has that athleticism and that arm. Alex Smith was a bit underrated as a deep thrower. And I think there's some basic things that I like about JJ McCarthy that remind me of Alex Smith. But when you look at it, I think his arm is a little bit bigger and he's a little bit more accurate. I also think he's a more willing and physical playmaker and runner. So you'll get that. Alex Smith was a very good athlete. Let's not forget that, coming out of Utah when he went to go number 1 overall to the 49ers. But McCarthy, we know, is not going to go number 1 overall. That's going to be Williams going to the Bears, but he could go any time after that. Really, it's developing to that situation here. Right now, you've heard the Commanders being interested in Drake May. Some say they're going to go after Jane Daniels. I think it's pretty close between those two guys. But now JJ McCarthy has entered the conversation here as going potentially as the number 2 quarterback off the board. Now, do we want the Commanders? Let's look at this. So Sam Howell, last year, different offense with Eric Bieniemy. He finished as QB22 in average scoring. He has since been traded to the Seahawks there. So that's what you got last year. And now they're transitioning to Cliff Kingsbury. We know Kingsbury has a really top fantasy football season as for a rookie under his belt with Kyler Murray. Different type of quarterback. We know JJ McCarthy is not going to be a dedicated runner, but some of the concepts could really help McCarthy, right? Spreading the field there. So that's what we have with the Commanders at number 2. Now you look at this Patriots offense, I think that's the landing spot where we're going to be iffy about any quarterback, right? It's the question of the weapons. Mac Jones was the QB 39 last year. They're transitioning their offense to Alex Van Pelt as well, and that could be a run-heavy attack. That could help McCarthy, but then again, you could see some of the qualities of McCarthy where they're not throwing as much with him there in that situation as the Patriots kind of tap into the Browns offense to some degree with Van Pelt coming over from Cleveland. So a lot of things to look at, but that's not a great spot. Then you look at the next team picking. You got to go away from number 2, number 3 overall. Go down to the Vikings. This seems to be the best spot for any quarterback not named Caleb Williams as a first-round rookie because, again, Kirk Cousins has vacated the position. He was a QB7 in average scoring before he went down with his torn Achilles. Now, look at the Vikings weapons. We know they're off the charts good. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. These are all first-round picks in skill positions there that we have. Jefferson, Addison for the Vikings, and, of course, Hawkinson for the Lions. So good established group there that they can still add to after moving on from KJ Osborne. You also look at Aaron Jones, a pretty good receiver out of the backfield. He hasn't shown that as much in recent years as he faded in Green Bay, but he's going to be a reliable guy that's going to make some plays. And they like some of their other potential at wide receiver as well. So, yeah, it's a very good landing spot. You get those weapons. You get Christian Darrisaw to lock down left tackle. You're going to protect that quarterback well, and McCarthy is going to be in business here. So QB7, that's how high that upside can be in the Kevin O'Connell offense here for that landing spot. Now, you look at the other potential teams, the Broncos. You had Russell Wilson, despite all the bad vibes there with Sean Payton in his lame duck season before they released him and he landed with the Steelers, he was still QB 16 there. So that was the next of these QB opening scorers there as a team last season. Definitely the Broncos at QB 16. Then you got really down there. The Raiders are also going to be on the clock. They might be thinking about McCarthy. It might be tough to get them now with the Commanders and Patriots and Vikings and Broncos all standing in their way. They're going to have to jump a lot of teams. So they're probably looking at Bo Nix there. I don't think Drake May or Jaden Daniels is going to fall to the Raiders. Raiders have to make a decision, or they're just happy bridging with Gardner Minshew. But last year with Aiden O'Connell, QB 35. So it went from Cousins, QB 7, all the way to Mac Jones at QB 39. Now, if you're going to rank the weapons, I think for a rookie quarterback, you'd say the Vikings. The support and weapons are number 1 in this group. Number 2, I think, would maybe surprise you. It's the Raiders, right? Yeah, they still have Devontae Adams. They have Jacoby Myers. Their tight end room with Michael Mayer's got a little bit of depth now. And we'll see what they can do at the receiving back to complement Zamir White. They have Alexander Madison as well. So Raiders have some weapons. They're going to Luke Getsy here. He worked with Justin Fields last year, helping him have a QB1 season on average in Chicago. So there's some potential there to translate that. But when you look at it, yeah, they've got good receivers and good options there to help that rookie quarterback produce. And we can talk about that more if the realistic scenario looks like Bo Nix would end up in Las Vegas. So they would be number 2. I say the Commanders are number 3. You got Terry McLaurin established number 1, Jahan Dotson, a first-round pick. They're at wide receiver. They got to figure out tight end a little bit. But in the passing game, I think they have more upside than you think. So that's the team I'm going to watch carefully now with Austin Eckler and Zach Ertz also in the mix. So you got 2 weapons that are sneaky good for rookie quarterbacks. Keep in mind, Austin Eckler was with Herbert. You had Ertz and Kyler Murray having a pretty good connection there at one point with the Cardinals. So pretty diverse group of weapons there that you look at. Moving on from Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel, now you come back with these guys there, Eckler and Ertz. So you should have a little bit of an upgrade there with those weapons. So arguably right up there with the Raiders that you can look at as the 3rd on this list. Now, I'd say 4th are the Broncos. We want to figure out what's going on in the backfield between Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, Samaje Perine. They did trade Jerry Jeudy to the Browns, so you're looking at Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, often injured with his knee, another major injury he's returning from, and the rookie Marvin Mims is there. And they have the tight end committee there of Greg Dulcich and Adam Troutman. So there's some intriguing pieces, but nothing we can totally sell ourselves in the Joe Lombardi offense. In Denver, then bring up a distant last year. They tried to upgrade a little bit. They actually got KJ Osborne as one of their better pickups of the offseason. They did bring back Hunter Henry. It's the Patriots. So, yeah, they got to find some receiving solutions. The offensive line, they did lose Trent Brown. They were able to keep Mike Owenu, but it also could be a run-heavy offense. So that's clearly the worst landing spot. For every quarterback who can't create himself a source of production, I think you definitely could see that with Jaden Daniels. Like, he might be the guy that could produce actually in New England, but those other guys, Drake May and McCarthy and Bo Nix and even Michael Penix Jr., I think that's going to be a hard place for those guys to produce. So, yeah, you don't want necessarily the rookie quarterback going to Patriots, but I think Bears, yeah, Caleb Williams, Bears, we know that's not a variable. We know that's going to happen. Now, the other match we're going to look at is who lands on the Vikings. And if JJ McCarthy lands on the Vikings or Drake May, we're going to really target that quarterback quite a bit. And you could once again, in average scoring, have 2 QB1s inside the top 12 like we had last year, only a bit reversed, right? Where McCarthy or May might be the Stroud of this year's class and finish a little ahead. And then, of course, there's that transition and translation to Caleb Williams being this year's Anthony Richardson. Hopefully he'll stay healthy, unlike Richardson, and give us that fantasy value throughout the season instead of a cup of coffee early in the season. So looking at the history of quarterbacks, the cycle is back pointing upward, right? We had that downtime with the 2021 and 2022 classes, but we're back on track here after last year. And I think the landing spots and everything that lines up here with these teams and style of offenses, supporting cast, all that good stuff points to at least 2 guys doing really well this season. So again, whoever lands with the Vikings, let's hope it's McCarthy at this stage, because I'd be really excited about that. But definitely Caleb Williams, not underrated or overrated at QB10, just about right. I think you would look at him a little bit higher if you were going for ceiling and being a little bit more aggressive. JJ McCarthy, by the way, is now down at QB27. So that's just the uncertainty of where he's going to go. Obviously, that's coming into play. But I would say if he lands with the Vikings, you'll see that really spike up here, because I would bet whoever ends up with the Vikings, May, McCarthy, someone else, is going to end up winning that starting job over Sam Darnold, with Darnold selling for backup duties and helping with the clipboard for O'Connell. All right, there's your look at your two intriguing quarterback prospects from the 2024 NFL draft and the rookie potential for fantasy football. We'll talk a lot more draft next week. Michelle is on vacation, so we'll take a deeper dive into that as she suggested. We'll give you how to set the table with all these prospects and what to expect from them across positions for this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football and this week of shows. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the madness, and we'll be back with our own look at April madness for the draft here coming up next week.